Your services are no longer required, the board chairman declared after the CEO's funeral. Clean out your office today. My name is Simon. I'm 42, been working as business director at Ravens Park Ventures here in Nashville for 8 years. The funeral had ended an hour ago, and Gerald was already making moves. Vincent and Rebecca flanked him like loyal dogs, nodding at everything he said. They'd already planned the company's new direction without me. I stood there in the conference room, still wearing my funeral suit, watching these three tear apart everything our late CEO had built. Gerald adjusted his tie and smiled, that cold smile he saved for moments like this. The one that said he'd been waiting for this day. We appreciate your years of service, Simon, but the board has decided to restructure. Your department will be absorbed into operations under new leadership. Vincent cleared his throat. We've already identified your replacement. Someone with a more modern approach to business development. Rebecca shuffled through papers, not bothering to look at me. Human resources will handle your severance package. Nothing personal. You understand. Nothing personal, right? I'd watched them circle like vultures for months, waiting for Arcio to pass. They never liked that he valued my input, that he trusted my instincts about market trends and business opportunities. To them, I was just another employee drawing a salary, taking up space they could fill with someone cheaper or more compliant. I see, I said, keeping my voice steady. When do you need me out? Today would be best, Gerald said. We're announcing the restructuring Monday morning. Clean transition, fresh start. I nodded politely and headed for the door. Behind me, I heard Rebecca giggle about something Vincent whispered. They were already celebrating, probably planning their lunch to toast the new regime. Gerald would get his promotion to interim CEO. Vincent would slide into operations, and Rebecca would handle whatever Gerald couldn't manage himself. They had no idea what I'd been doing with my evenings for the past 5 years. How I taught myself to read chart patterns, support and resistance levels, moving averages. How those late nights studying market data had turned into something they couldn't fathom. They saw me as Simon the employee. Simon who drove the same Honda for 6 years. Simon who brought peanut butter sandwiches for lunch. They never saw Simon who'd quietly built a trading account worth $15 million. Friday would be fun. The truth was I'd started trading out of necessity. My wife died 7 years ago. Cancer and the medical bills ate through our savings despite the insurance. I needed extra income but couldn't take a second job without affecting my performance here. So, I opened a small trading account with $3,000. First, I lost money like everyone does. But I'm stubborn and I'd always been good with numbers. I spent nights reading everything I could find about technical analysis, candlestick patterns, volume indicators. I practiced on paper trades until I understood how markets moved, how fear and greed drove prices up and down. The breakthrough came when I realized that trading wasn't gambling if you had rules. Cut losses quickly. Let winners run. Never risk more than 2% of your account on any single trade. Simple concepts that most people ignored because they wanted to get rich fast. I didn't want to get rich fast. I wanted to never be broke again. My account grew slowly at first. 5,000 became 8, 8 became 15. I reinvested everything, lived off my salary from Ravens Park and kept learning. By the 3rd year I was making more from trading than from my day job. By the 5th year I had enough to change everything. That's when I started buying Ravens Park stock. The company was publicly traded but closely held. Most shares belonged to the original founders or long-term employees who'd received stock options over the years. Gerald, Vincent, and Rebecca each owned small percentages through their board compensation packages, maybe 2 or 3% each. They assumed everyone else was like them, holding tiny fractions that meant nothing. I was careful about it. Used different brokerage accounts, sometimes bought through shell companies I'd set up for my trading business. When shareholders sold during market downturns, I bought. When estate sales happened after retirements or deaths, I bought those too. Always in small lots, never enough to trigger disclosure requirements. The board meetings became more interesting once I understood the numbers behind their decisions. I'd watched Gerald pontificate about strategic direction while knowing he had no idea who actually owned the company he thought he was controlling. Vincent would present budgets that favored his projects, and Rebecca would second his motions, both of them playing politics with what they believed was someone else's money. Last month I'd crossed 50% ownership. By Tuesday, after buying shares from our late CEO's estate, I controlled 51% of Ravens Park Ventures. They wanted to restructure. They wanted fresh leadership. They wanted me gone. Perfect. I had some restructuring ideas of my own. The funeral reception had been typical corporate theater. Lots of handshakes, rehearsed condolences, people positioning themselves for whatever came next. I'd watched Gerald work the room like he was already CEO. Vincent and Rebecca trailing behind him like a campaign staff. Our late CEO's widow, Patricia, had pulled me aside near the end. He always said you were the smartest person in that building, Simon. He worried about what would happen after he was gone. He was a good man. I told her. Built something worth protecting. She'd squeezed my hand. I hope someone does protect it. He wouldn't want to see it torn apart by people who don't understand what it means. That conversation stuck with me as I drove home to my empty house in the suburbs. Patricia was right to worry. Gerald, Vincent, and Rebecca saw Ravens Park as a vehicle for their own ambitions, not as something valuable in itself. They'd gut the departments that didn't serve their purposes. Fire people who'd given years of their lives to the company, all to boost short-term profits and their own bonuses. I'd been planning this moment for 2 years, ever since I realized how much stock I could accumulate. But sitting in my driveway that evening, still wearing my funeral suit, I felt the weight of what was about to happen. Tomorrow would change everything. Not just for me but for everyone who worked at Ravens Park. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister in Chicago. How was the service? You doing okay? Fine. Texted back. Big changes coming at work. Good changes or bad changes? I stared at that question for a long time. For Gerald, Vincent, and Rebecca, they'd be catastrophic changes. They'd lose their positions, their influence, their plans for corporate advancement. For the employees they'd planned to fire, the departments they wanted to eliminate, the changes would be salvation. Good changes, I typed back, long overdue. I went inside and pulled out the files I'd been preparing for months. Stock certificates, ownership documentation, corporate bylaws, voting procedures, everything I'd need to make Friday's board meeting memorable. I'd had my lawyer review every document twice. Made sure there were no technicalities they could exploit, no loopholes they could slip through. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were firing me for being expendable, for lacking the vision and resources to compete in their new corporate structure. If they only knew that while they'd been playing office politics, I'd been quietly buying their company one share at a time. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my kitchen looking out at the backyard where my wife used to tend her garden. She would have enjoyed this moment. I thought she always hated bullies. And that's what Gerald, Vincent, and Rebecca really were. Bullies who mistook titles for power and assumed that quiet people were weak people. Friday couldn't come fast enough. Friday morning arrived gray and cold. I got to the office early before Gerald and his allies and spent an hour reviewing the agenda they distributed. Item 1, appointment of interim CEO. Item 2, departmental restructuring. Item 3, personnel changes. My termination was buried under Item 3 like an afterthought. I dressed carefully that morning. My best suit, the navy one I'd worn to important client meetings. Polished shoes, fresh haircut, the works. If you're going to stage a corporate coup, you might as well look the part. Gerald arrived at 9 sharp. Vincent and Rebecca in tow. They set up their materials in the boardroom like generals preparing for battle. Charts showing proposed cost savings. Organizational diagrams with their names in the top boxes. Financial projections that conveniently assumed I'd be gone. Morning, Simon, Gerald said without looking up from his papers. I trust you're ready to transition your responsibilities. Absolutely, I replied. I've prepared some materials for the board's consideration. Rebecca glanced at Vincent, who shrugged. They probably assumed I was going to beg for my job or present some desperate counter-proposal. The kind of thing a cornered employee might try when facing termination. The other board members trickled in over the next few minutes. Thompson from legal, Williams from finance, Morrison from operations. Good people mostly who'd been kept in the dark about Gerald's restructuring plans. They nodded politely as they took their seats, flipping through the agenda packets with confused expressions. "Before we begin," Thompson said, "I have to ask about the timing of these changes. It seems rushed coming so soon after the funeral." Gerald cleared his throat. "The market doesn't wait for our grief, Thompson. We need to move quickly to maintain investor confidence and operational efficiency. Besides," Vincent added, "these changes have been under discussion for months. We're just implementing plans that were already in development." That was a lie. But none of the other board members had been included in those discussions. They'd been excluded deliberately, kept ignorant until it was too late to object. Gerald's strategy was simple. Present the changes as a fait accompli, get quick approval from a grief-stricken board, and consolidate power before anyone could mount opposition. "Well," I said, opening my briefcase. "Since we're talking about operational efficiency and investor confidence, I think the board should review some additional information before voting on these proposals." Gerald's smile faltered slightly. "What kind of information?" "Ownership structures, voting procedures, that sort of thing." I pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the conference table. "Legal documentation that affects how these decisions should be made." Williams leaned forward. "Simon, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about corporate governance," I said calmly. "Who has the authority to make the decisions being proposed today?" Rebecca's face flushed. "You're an employee, Simon. You don't have voting rights in this matter." "Actually," I said, opening the folder, "I think you'll find that's not entirely accurate." The room went quiet. Gerald's confidence was evaporating, replaced by something that looked like fear. He'd built his entire strategy on the assumption that he was dealing with powerless people, that the board members would rubber stamp his proposals because they didn't have alternatives. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Thompson asked. I pulled out the first document, a stock ownership summary I'd had prepared by my attorney. "I'm suggesting that before we vote on restructuring, personnel changes, or leadership appointments, we should clarify who actually owns this company." Vincent grabbed the paper from my hand, scanned it quickly, then passed it to Gerald. I watched their faces change as they processed what they were reading. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something approaching panic. "This can't be right," Gerald whispered. "Feel free to verify it," I said. "All the documentation is properly filed with the appropriate authorities." The trap was sprung. They'd walked into this meeting expecting to eliminate me, and instead they discovered that I owned the company they thought they were controlling. Gerald stared at the ownership documents like they were written in a foreign language. 51%. That's impossible. Where did you get the money for this? "I earned it," I said simply. Vincent was doing calculations on his phone trying to figure out how much capital my stock position represented. His face went pale when he reached the final number. "This is $15 million worth of stock. You're a director-level employee. Your salary couldn't support this kind of investment." "You're right. My salary couldn't, but my trading income could." Rebecca laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the conference room walls. "Trading income. You're telling us you day traded your way into majority ownership of this company. Not day trading, swing trading, position trading, some longer-term investments. I've been at it for 5 years." The other board members were passing the documents around, studying the details. Thompson, the lawyer, was nodding slowly as he recognized the legal structure. "These shell companies, the nominee accounts, the timing of the purchases. You've been accumulating shares systematically." "Very systematically," I agreed. "Always below the disclosure thresholds, always through different entities, always during periods when other shareholders were selling." Williams looked up from his copy of the ownership summary. "The estate sale last week, you bought the CEO's shares. Patricia wanted to liquidate quickly to settle the estate. I offered fair market value same-day closing." Gerald's hands were shaking now. You've been planning this all this time, sitting in meetings, listening to our plans. You've been scheming to take over. I've been protecting my investment, I corrected. And it's a good thing, considering what you were planning to do with it. I pulled out another folder, this one containing printouts of emails and documents I'd collected over the past months. Evidence of Gerald's behind-the-scenes maneuvering, Vincent's budget manipulations, Rebecca's promises to supporters about their roles in the new structure. You want to talk about scheming? Continued. Let's discuss how you three have been planning this takeover since our CEO was diagnosed. How you've been positioning yourselves to eliminate anyone who might object to your vision of corporate restructuring. Morrison, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Is this true? You've been planning personnel changes without board approval. Vincent tried to bluff his way out. We were preparing contingency plans. That's responsible management. Contingency plans that included firing me today and restructuring my department without consulting anyone else on this board. I said contingency plans that assumed you could make these decisions without regard for actual ownership or proper corporate governance. I spread the emails across the table. Messages between Gerald and Vincent about eliminating dead weight from the payroll. Rebecca's notes about bringing in fresh blood for key positions. Their timeline for implementing changes before the board could object. The three of you have been treating this company like your personal property, I continued, making decisions based on your own career ambitions rather than shareholder interests. Well, congratulations. Now you get to explain those decisions to the actual majority shareholder. Thompson was reading through the emails with a lawyer's attention to detail. Gerald, these communications suggest a coordinated effort to circumvent normal board procedures. It's not what it looks like, Gerald said weakly. It looks like a conspiracy to illegally seize control of this company, I replied. It looks like breach of fiduciary duty. It looks like exactly the kind of corporate malfeasance that destroys shareholder value and ruins reputations. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what had just happened. The coup Gerald had planned for months had collapsed in minutes, victim of intelligence failures and assumptions about who held real power. My turn to restructure. So I said, settling back in my chair. Let's discuss the real agenda for today's meeting. Gerald was still clutching the ownership documents like they might change if he held them tight enough. You can't walk in here and take over. There are procedures, protocols. There are indeed. Agreed. And as majority shareholder, I'm calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board leadership. Thompson consulted his copy of the corporate bylaws. That's within your rights, Simon. As majority shareholder, you have the authority to call for such votes. Williams and Morrison exchanged glances. They'd been blindsided by Gerald's restructuring plans, and now they were watching a complete reversal of corporate power. To their credit, they seemed more interested in understanding the situation than picking sides. Furthermore, I continued, I'm proposing immediate termination of Gerald Morrison as board chairman, Vincent Hayes as operations director, and Rebecca Stone as strategic planning coordinator. You can't fire board members, Rebecca shrieked. Actually, I said calmly. Gerald and Vincent aren't just board members. They're employees of this company serving at the pleasure of the shareholders. Rebecca's consulting contract can be terminated with 30 days' notice, which I'm providing right now. I pulled out pre-prepared termination letters, each one carefully reviewed by my attorney. Gerald's face went from pale to flushed red as he read his. Vincent crumpled his letter and threw it on the table. Rebecca just stared at hers like she couldn't process the words. This is insane, Vincent said. You're destroying this company out of spite. No, I replied. I'm saving it from people who were about to destroy it for personal gain. Your restructuring plan would have eliminated 12 jobs, outsourced our customer service department, and reduced research and development funding by 40%. All to boost short-term profits and justify your own salary increases. Morrison leaned forward. Is that accurate? The job cuts and budget reductions. I passed him copies of Gerald's internal memos outlining the planned changes. 42 people were going to lose their jobs by Christmas. The customer service team was going to be replaced by an offshore call center. R&D funding was going to be redirected to executive compensation packages. Williams whistled softly as he read through the documents. Gerald, this would have gutted the company's competitive advantages. Sometimes difficult decisions are necessary, Gerald said defensively. But his voice lacked conviction. He'd been caught red-handed planning changes that benefited him personally at the expense of everyone else. Difficult decisions, yes, I agreed. Like the decision to remove leadership that puts personal ambition ahead of company welfare. Thompson, as corporate counsel, please prepare the paperwork for immediate leadership changes. Thompson nodded. I'll need board approval for the terminations. You have it, I said. As majority shareholder, my vote carries 51% of the total. Anyone else wish to vote on these measures? Williams raised his hand. I second the motion to remove current leadership. Morrison followed suit. Third it. Motion carries. Thompson announced. Gerald Morrison, Vincent Hayes, and Rebecca Stone are hereby removed from their positions, effective immediately. Gerald stood up slowly. His face a mask of rage and humiliation. This isn't over, Simon. You think you can just waltz in here and tear apart everything we've built? Everything you've built? I laughed. Gerald, you've been here 2 years. Vincent, 18 months. Rebecca was hired 6 months ago. You didn't build anything. You were planning to tear apart what other people built. And now you're upset that someone stopped you. The security guards I'd arranged to be on standby entered the conference room on cue. Gentlemen. I nodded to the security guards. Please escort these individuals to their offices to collect personal belongings. Their access cards and company devices should be returned to human resources before they leave the building. Gerald's face went through a spectrum of emotions. Shock, rage, disbelief, and finally something approaching terror as he realized the magnitude of what had just happened. You've made a huge mistake, Simon. When the other shareholders find out about this hostile takeover. The other shareholders? I interrupted. You mean the 49% who aren't me? They'll be thrilled to learn that their investment is no longer being managed by people who plan to gut the company for short-term gains. Vincent tried one last desperate move. The board won't stand for this. They'll fight your decisions. Williams spoke up from across the table. Actually, Vincent, I think Simon's approach makes more sense than your restructuring plan did. I've been concerned about the direction this company was heading. Morrison nodded agreement. Eliminating customer service and cutting R&D. That's not sustainable growth. That's corporate cannibalism. Rebecca gathered her papers with shaking hands. This is a witch hunt. You're destroying careers over personal vendettas. I'm ending careers that were built on destroying other people's livelihoods, I replied. The 42 employees you plan to fire might see it differently than you do. Thompson consulted his watch. Security will escort you to your offices. You have 30 minutes to collect personal items before your access is terminated. Gerald made one final attempt at defiance. You think you've won something here? Running a company isn't the same as buying stock. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. I stood up and straightened my tie. Gerald, I've spent 8 years learning every aspect of this business. I know our customers, our competition, our supply chains, our financial position, and our growth opportunities. What I didn't know was how much damage you were planning to do to all of it. The security guards stepped forward. Gerald, Vincent, and Rebecca had no choice but to follow them out of the boardroom. Their exit was silent except for the sound of their footsteps echoing down the hallway. I remained in the boardroom after they left, sitting quietly with the remaining board members as we processed what had just happened. Thompson was reviewing legal documents. Williams was calculating budget implications, and Morrison was reading through the employee retention plans I'd prepared to replace Gerald's downsizing strategy. So, what happens now? Williams asked. Now we run this company the right way, I said. We keep our employees, maintain our customer service standards, and invest in research and development. We build long-term value instead of chasing quarterly bonuses. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was Patricia, our late CEO's widow. I heard through the grapevine that there were changes at the company today. I hope they were positive ones. Very positive, I texted back. Your husband's vision is safe. Over the following weeks, the consequences of Gerald, Vincent, and Rebecca's failed coup became clear. Gerald's attempt to secure a CEO position at another company fell through when potential employers learned about his removal from Ravens Park for attempting to restructure a company he didn't realize was owned by someone else. Vincent found himself blacklisted from operations roles after word spread through industry networks about his involvement in the failed takeover and his plans to eliminate customer service jobs for personal gain. Rebecca's consulting practice collapsed when clients questioned her competence after learning she'd been outmaneuvered by an employee whose financial resources and trading success she'd completely failed to detect. All three became cautionary tales in corporate governance circles about the dangers of underestimating quiet colleagues and making assumptions based on job titles rather than actual capabilities. I kept my office simple, changed nothing about my daily routine, and continued eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch. The only difference was that now I was eating them in the CEO's chair, having learned that true power comes not from titles or politics, but from competence, preparation, and the patience to let others reveal their true intentions before you reveal your own strength.